Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Straight Science. Straight Science is an evening seminar series put on by University of Alaska Fairbanks Northwest Campus in Nome, and also University of Alaska University of Alaska Fairbanks Alaska Sea Grant. And tonight, actually, Alaska Sea Grant is on the road. But both Northwest Campus and Alaska Sea Grant, we are public servants of the Bering Strait region, which is the homeland and waters of the Inupiaq, St. Lawrence Island Yupik, and Central Yupik peoples. And tonight, I'm so excited because we had Chris Barger on a little while when he was earlier when he was starting this project, and he's coming to give us the rest of the story. So this is going to be a good one. Chris Barger is with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. He is a regional research biologist in Fairbanks with the Division of Wildlife Conservation. And he is no stranger to straight science, and he is no stranger to the Alaska hare, which is an important resource to us. And we all want to know how he catches them. And with that, we're so glad you're here, Chris, and we want to hear the rest of your story and how are Alaska hares going, and what does it mean actually for the regulatory world for hares and for us in the Bering Strait region. So thank you so much for being here, and please take it away. Can't wait to hear more.
Oh, thanks for the introduction and thanks for having me. As you said, I've done quite a bit of research on Alaska hares over the years. And tonight I'd just like to take some time and show everyone some of the research we're doing and an update on it. And I'll try really hard not to bore anyone with some of the background on the regulatory process, but I think it's pretty important as well. Oh, there we go. So I did want to start out with a little bit about myself. So I've lived in Fairbanks for over 25 years now. I moved up from Montana when I was a kid, or right out of high school. And I've been a biologist with Fish and Game for now almost 15 years, which is hard to believe. And most of my work has been done at UAF and at Fish and Game, and it's all really centered around birds. I've pretty much worked on birds my whole life. And over these years, I've been lucky enough to work on everything from eagles to little tiny songbirds all over the state. So a lot of people wonder why I get called the bunny guy at work. Well, it started back in 2013 when I got asked to go look for some giant mythical bunnies that were out in some hills near Quinnahock to help out a master's project that was going on at UAF at the time. I thought to myself, sure, I know a ton about snowshoes. It's just the big version. It can't be that much harder, right? So I get out there and we snow machine out and have a wonderful time. And then that was the first time I saw these things, these animals, and they are so impressive. And that's when I really got to understand how different they are from snowshoe hares. They're not even the same ballpark. They're very different animals, and they act differently and they respond differently. And it just became I almost fell in love with them then, and I just always wanted to learn more about them. And the more I dug, the less I could find. So when this opportunity to work on this project popped up, I jumped on it as fast as I could. So I did want to start out with that there's two different species of hares that live in Alaska. Here on the left, we have the Alaska hare, the big one. It's also known as a tundra hare. I kind of like that name better. And a lot of people in Western Alaska where they live refer to them as jackrabbits. And I also kind of like that name too. And on the right, we have the snowshoe hare, the smaller one. Well, the Alaska hare is an endemic to Alaska. And what that means is that it's only found here in Alaska. There's big giant hares in Russia and in Canada, but there are different species. So that species is limited to Western Alaska from Kotzebue in the north to Cold Bay in the south. Whereas in the snowshoe hare is kind of everywhere. And I even got to looking at this distribution map today, and I realized it's not even that accurate. I've seen snowshoe hares way outside their distribution area. And just for reference, this red part is where we expect to find them, but I've found them all over the North Slope and the Seward Peninsula. Well, the snowshoe hare is a lot smaller. It's 3 to 4 pounds compared to some of these Alaska hares, which are reaching 7, all the way up to like 15, 16 pounds. So they're quite a lot larger. And one of the things that comes with that, and one of the big key differences between these two bunnies, is some of their life history strategies. Alaska hares can live a long time. I personally have sampled some that have been alive at least 5 years as an adult, and they likely go like 6, 8, 10 years old. Who knows how long they go in captivity? And they can only really produce one litter of leverets or baby bunnies, baby hares per year, compared to a snowshoe hare, which lives fast and furious, and they usually only live for a few years before something gets them, and they can really produce some bunnies at 3 or 4 litters in a year if all the conditions are right. So the first thing that like everybody always mentions is how big they are. And so here's a game camera I've got of an Alaska hare on the left, and it actually has a collar on it, and an adult snowshoe hare, and they're kind of sitting in a bait pile with my bow net, which we'll talk about later. But we'll see if this actually plays. Oh, it's working. So when they're moving around, you can see how much bigger this thing is compared to a snowshoe hare. I mean, they just dwarf them. And the one thing that really stands out is how white their fur is. Their fur is stark white compared to a snowshoe that has a lot of gray undertones in them. And if you look really close, you can see that they have a black tip on their ear. And I'll admit that it's kind of hard to see the black tip unless you're right up and close to them. But it's just really impressive how big those hind feet are. I mean, the hind feet are almost the size of the snowshoe. The other question I get a lot is why Alaska hares? Why do we care about Alaska hares? Well, this all started quite a while ago with a concern from local residents and biologists out in the area in Western Alaska. And the consensus I kept hearing is we see a lot less than we used to years ago. When I was a kid, I saw a ton of them in town. I don't see them anymore. Where'd they go? What's happening to them? So we started looking into it, and lo and behold, we can't really find any information on them. So that just the lack of any information on this species that's only found in Alaska, and at that, it's only found in Western Alaska. There's only been a couple studies that have ever been done, compared to a snowshoe hare where there's hundreds and hundreds of papers published on them. So that really got us wondering about Alaska hares, but then we got kind of nervous. Can we even go find any? Because they're kind of hard to find. And digging a little deeper into some historical accounts, we know that the current population is substantially lower than it was 50 years ago. Back in the 70s and 80s, Fish and Game used to produce game bird reports, is what we called them. And you can dig through these, and they'll give you notes about moose surveys and what they saw. They saw a lot of ptarmigan, or what else was occurring during those surveys. And we found some from the 70s and 80s that reported really high abundances and densities of Alaska hares. Everything from the Good Hope River, and folks reporting 600 to 800 individuals in that drainage, to the Kuzatran up in that country. And they were reporting groups up to 300 to 500 of these individuals all hanging out together in the spring. But nowadays, you only really find them in a group of 3 or 4, or mostly it's just one by itself, and they cover a lot of country, so they leave a lot of tracks. But they're not as social as they used to be, and they used to be a relatively social animal with other Alaska hares. So for this project, we had three main goals that we're trying to do. The first one just being, how many are there right now? The basics, right? And then when we came up with that, it seems like, oh, that's easy enough. But then how do we actually go about counting them? And that is a harder question. And if we could figure out how to do that, we could probably lay the groundwork for some long-term monitoring of the species, which is something that's really needed. The next thing we were wondering is, where do they even go? Like, if we have no idea where these bunnies go, do they just kind of hang out like a snowshoe in a little tiny area, or do they need a lot of land? And so that's pretty important if we want to figure out, if we harvest a large number of hares from a really small area, how likely is it that they can reestablish themselves? Are they moving a fair bit of distance and they could reestablish that area if we over harvest in like a small area versus a big area? And the last big one is, what do they even eat, specifically in the winter when food is harder to find? And do they eat the same thing as a snowshoe? Do they eat different things? No one knows. So we're going to try and figure that one out. So to answer all these questions, we began work in 2017, and that continued, and that was more pilot work, just trying to address, can we find populations of these that are even big enough that we can work on them? And so that continued all the way up through 2022. And all that time, we ended up going to 7 different locations shown on the map, all the way from up by Kotzebue, the Baldwin Peninsula, Selleck Hills, down through Nome, and then more in the southwest side, down by Dillingham, E. Cook, south of Bethel, and even down in King Salmon on the peninsula there. And so we ended up doing 16 different surveys and capture attempts, and those range in time from 10 days to a month or two. And the crazy thing is, over that like 5 year span, I lived in Western Alaska for almost a year and a half of my life. And even while there, I think we snow machined roughly around 20,000 miles during this project. And I alone, I'm pretty sure I did around 13,000 miles, but I honestly don't know because the odometers broke and the readouts broke on the snow machine. So they just go blank, and that's kind of my rough guess. And in the end, we had at least 10 staff members help us out, and one of them's listening right now. And I was lucky enough to bring 5 different volunteers on from all over the place, and they got to go experience this as well. So getting back to that first question, how many are there? So the main goal is to try and make a survey that we can repeat and could be used as a long-term monitoring tool. And out of that survey, we really want to know abundance or how many there are along that survey, and also a way to try and figure out density. How many of them are in a specific area? And then through this, you can get how many males to females, the buck to doe ratios, and see the variability between these different areas, and hopefully throughout the years as you survey them to tell if the populations are going up or going down. Well, for rabbits and hares, there's several different ways you can go about counting them, and we tried so many different ones that failed. So the first one we thought, well, a lot of people actually just count them by going along a transect and counting them with spotlights or during the day. But that failed pretty quickly. We learned in the first few days of that try that it's not going to work, and it's we just really can't see that many of them. Even though we're seeing some tracks and sign, we're still only seeing one individual every now and then. And through this work, I wasn't always trying to see the Alaska hares. I was just covering country to go to the different locations and run my transects to see their sign. And there'd be some years where I might cover 5,000 miles and I'd only see a handful of them. But I wasn't really going out at night specifically looking for them. But they're pretty low densities throughout their whole range. The other way you can do it is aerial surveys. In Fish and Game, we do that all the time. Hop in a plane, hop in a helicopter, count things from the ground. Well, I did try that while I was getting moved out to some remote field work, and the snowshoe hares can make you sick when you're looking out of a R44 window when there's 800 snowshoes running around in circles below you. And all that, we ended up only seeing a couple, but it just wasn't really feasible. And one of the main challenges with some of the aerial work out there, as you folks know, is that the weather is so unpredictable and it's pretty expensive to run a helicopter. But I do think that after all this we've learned, there is some way that you could utilize a aerial survey for this species in the more remote parts of the state that are just very hard to access with even a snow machine. So it all kind of shook down to weather, and that's something that the gnome folks know more than anyone else. If it's not just a whiteout blizzard where you're stuck out of town and you can't see your skis on your snow machine, it then turns into a downpour of heavy, wet snow that's crushing your Arctic oven. And then, if it wasn't that, it was the flat light. And I heard people say that out there, and being in Fairbanks, we get flat light, but there's trees. I had no idea what flat light really was. It is absolutely insane that you can't tell if you're going up, down, sideways, or backwards. It is some of the worst conditions to ride in and you to do the flat light. So I have the utmost respect for all the Western Alaskans out in that stuff. It is very challenging work to work in out there, just to go safely somewhere. And as it turned out, if it wasn't for the flat light, the blizzards, the heavy snow, the wind, sometimes the snow just decided to melt. And I heard you guys had 38 above the other day. Well, one time it just melted and we got stranded 90 miles from town and all the rivers broke open. And the most interesting part was I went out 2 weeks later and it was 10 below. So the unpredictable weather is one of the biggest challenges with working with a species. Sometimes you go to a community and you're all set up to work with four-wheelers because there's no snow, and then you show up and it's snowed a foot. And so you get some snow machines lined up, and then you go do that, and then all the snow melts. And so it's a really challenging place to work, as everyone on this talk knows. So what did we find out at the end of this? After trying lots of things, we found that just doing a pellet transect and picking up pellets for their DNA was the most reliable, repeatable way to do this. So we ended up using a snow machine to follow transects through various habitat types in different locations to collect Alaska hare pellets in the winter. And then we thawed these pellets, and with each pellet we took a GPS location so we knew where it came from. And then with each pellet, we'd thaw them and then wipe them with a toothpick to remove the DNA. And the interesting thing that a lot of folks don't know is that the hair DNA from the bunny itself is only on the outside of the pellet. It's not on the inside. The inside is all just whatever it ate, but the hair DNA is on the outside. So you only really need to scrape the outside of the pellet to get the hair DNA. And after you run that, you can figure out which individual that was, a unique individual. You can tell them from everybody else, and you can tell whether male or females. So we found that this was kind of the most practical way to go about trying to count them. As you can see in this picture, the Alaska hare pellets tend to be a lot larger than snowshoe hare pellets, but that's not always the case. I've seen individual Alaska hares have everything from big to little pellets, and one would worry about that messing up the estimates of how many are there. But with these genetic markers, I can tell which species it is as well. So it's not really that big of a deal. So here's an example of some of the snow machine transects, not all of them, but some of them that we did in Nome. So we repeated these transects every year for 3 years. And we also did them in the middle late winter in January, February, and also in the spring and April. So we did them each twice. And, it would be a 2 to 300, 2 to 400 miles each year. So these were completed in Nome in 2020, 2021, and 2022. And through that, we ended up picking up around 1,800. We successfully analyzed 1,800 pellets, but in total, we probably picked up well over 2,000 pellets that were cataloged for this. What did we find? Well, this is the kind of the interesting part. Up in the northern part near on the Baldwin Peninsula from Kotzebue down to the Selkirk Hills, I actually couldn't find any evidence of Alaska hares. I know that some of the folks up there were harvesting them in 2006 is the last one I'm aware of. But while I was up there, I could never find a track or any sign of them on the peninsula. But down in the Selkirk Hills, I did run across some, and we ended up picking up 200 samples. And out of that, there was 7 different individuals. 6 were male and 1 were female. And that was probably 600 miles of surveying effort. In the Nome area over those years, we probably actually surveyed around 1,500 miles, picked up, 2,000 samples. And of that, we detected 154 different Alaska hares. 93 were male and 61 were female. And then in the Ecook-Dillingham region, down south, we surveyed with us and a contractor around 500, 600 miles, and we picked up 150 pellets, and we found 20 different hares. So they're kind of scattered throughout their range in all the places I've been, just in low densities in most places. Now, Nome is the really interesting and useful location. So a lot of the work I talk about is really specific to just Nome because there were so many repeated surveys in the region. And then this is really powerful because the surveys were repeated within a year and between years. So we have a lot of different ways that we can analyze this. And it allows us to do some fancy math. Not really me, but the computer can do it. I'm not the math wizard, but the computer can do it. And so this kind of analysis incorporates spatial. And what I mean by that is where we actually pick the sample up, the GPS location of that individual, and how many times we sampled that individual, and where we sampled it between the surveys and between the years. So if we use all that information together, now we don't just get an estimate of abundance, which is how many are out there. We also get an estimate of density. How many are out there per an area? And in this case, I use kilometers squared. So how many big giant bunnies would you expect per square kilometer in the survey area? And so, and the other thing that this gives us is an estimate of survival. It also provides how many adults survive from one year to the next from these repeated surveys that are going concurrently. So what did we find? So from this known preliminary abundance estimates, um, I know this figure is kind of busy. It's basically showing us how many bunnies we have out there. In the red, we have females, and in the blue, we have males. And this is the estimate of how many hares how many hares we estimated that year in the survey. So we have 2020, 2021, and 2022. And so as you can see, we estimated around 15 females and 18 males. And these are the confidence error bars. We're 95% sure that the true number lies between that bar and that bar, the upper part and the lower part. And using all these repeated samplings really helps us decrease our error in that estimate. One of the interesting things is that we always detect more males than females, and that's kind of everywhere we go, and it still shows up in this. And it made me wonder if we're just missing a lot of the females, which could happen. But the thing that that I hang up with that is that whenever we had collared hares that were active in the survey area, we always detected them. We never actually missed a collared hare on the survey. After running this analysis, we found that the survival of adults was around 60%. And that's okay. It's not great. Other hare species go everywhere from 20% for some of these snowshoes, can be even lower, all the way up to other big giant hares in Greenland per se can have about a survival percentage of 90%. So we're not great. We're not horrible on survival. The one thing that was not really shocking to me, but it was interesting to see the actual number was the density. I know that the reason I like working in Nome is many reasons, but one of them being that there are Alaska hares around, so I can at least find some. And so I thought it would have a little bit higher density, but it has an extremely low density of 0.0002 hares per kilometer squared, which is very low. Other large hares like the Arctic hare is anywhere from zero point zero 0.02 to 1.8 hares per kilometer squared. The mountain hare and the European hare, which are similar size, just in Russia and Europe, are anywhere from 15 to 100 hares per kilometer squared. And we all know how snowshoes can be. They can be anywhere from 0 to 500 hares per kilometer squared. Excuse me. So there's quite a bit of change in the densities, but overall, the from this study, the Alaska hares are some of the lowest densities of large lagomorphs or hare species out there. And one thing I did want to bring up is that between 2020 and 2021, there was a regulatory change. So the first year of these surveys, there was no bag limit and no closed season. As many as you wanted to harvest could be harvested. After 2020, when I went back to survey again, there we enacted a bag limit of 2 per day and a total of 6 per year, and there was a season date along with it. And one thing that I do find is kind of interesting is if you look from 2020 to the following years, you do see an increase in hares, the number of bunnies we're seeing on the landscape. So after this regulatory change, we do see an increase in hares. It could be driven by multiple factors. Maybe it's the regulatory change, maybe it's not. We don't know. But it is a good sign, if anything else. So I thought about bringing up regulatory changes at the end of this talk, but I was pretty sure everyone would just fall asleep if I did that because can be kind of a dry subject. But I think it's also a really important subject for anyone that really uses our wild game and fish resources. It's a really important to understand how this works, I think, and it's something I didn't even really understand until I started working at the department, which is kind of embarrassing to say, but it's true. The biggest misconception is that Fish and Game makes the rules. All my friends blame me anytime we do anything. They say it's my fault and they yell at me. So I get it a lot, and so it was worth my benefit to actually go out and figure out how this works when I first got here. It is true that we don't make the rules, but we can close a season or a fishery if we need to, if we're worried about a conservation concern. And those are called emergency orders or EOs. But regulations are an important public process. As a biologist, we could create a proposal, and our job is to present the data and the impacts of rules and changes to the rules. The board of game is actually the body that ends up establishing these as rules. And the board of game is made up of 7 individuals that are appointed by the governor. And one thing that they also have to deal with a lot are allocation issues. And by that I mean like for an example of an allocation issue would be what percentage of a hunt goes to residents versus non-residents. That is completely in the board of game's hands. So, how does a rule actually get made? How does it work? So, it's a public process, and the first thing in this step is to create a proposal. There's a rule you'd like to see change. You'd like to see a youth hunt in a certain area for a certain species. Any kind of these rule hunts, season dates, any kind of allocation, first starts with a proposal. And that proposal is either created by a member of the public, anyone on here can submit a proposal if they like. A lot of times, these proposals come in through advisory committees, and we call those ACs. So if you hear somebody say AC, that's what they're talking about. So this is a big committee in your region. Like in Nome, you'll have the Nome AC, and these are open meetings where they discuss these topics about proposals. The other way a proposal is created is through the department. We can't create a rule, but we can suggest rule changes through creating our own proposals. And I'm not an expert on this, so I should have said this at the beginning. This is my understanding. There's a good chance I'm off on something, but this is the way I understand it. So don't hold my feet against the fire if I say something wrong, Bren. Um, so in fish and game, we typically have management biologists and research biologists. Management biologists usually deal with this process more and work a lot with advisory committees, and they deal with the majority of proposals. And the research biologists try to help out the management biologists with providing current research that would help answer some of these questions. I am a research biologist, but when nobody else tends to work on bunnies, all the board of game work tends to fall on my desk, which is a good thing. I've learned quite a bit. But after a proposal gets submitted, it'll end up landing on your desk. And the way that is found out is whoever's the most pertinent to that subject, that's the proposals get. Usually, the area biologist will get the proposals for their area, whichever makes sense. And so, after you get a proposal, you have to create something called an analysis and recommendation, and we call those ANRs for short. And all these, after they're finalized, are published online. And there's quite a bit of information in these about what the proposal is, who proposed it, and what would it do. And our job is to use data and show what this proposal would actually do and what it wouldn't do. And then after these ANRs are published, every proposal that is submitted gets presented to the board of game by a staff member. And now this is one of the things as a research biologist I try and hide from because it's the only time I'm forced to wear a suit and a tie. So I try and hide from these things quite a bit. And it's a very interesting process. But after you present your proposals, the board of game then deliberates on that proposal and they decide what the rule should be or shouldn't be and if it should be changed. And it's a very similar process for the federal subsistence regulations and fisheries regulations. So, how do you get involved in this process? Well, the Board of Game meets every 3 years for your region, for your area. For Western Alaska, Northwestern Alaska, it'll be next year in Kotzebue. Well, you can watch this online, or if you're in Kotzebue, you can go in person and watch these Board of Game proposals being deliberated. And it can be an interesting process if you're into hunting and fishing and those sort of things. The other thing that's pretty impactful is public testimony. At the beginning of the Board of Game meeting, any a member from the public can testify. And this is your opportunity to go in front of the board and say, I like proposal 5 because it really helps our community put more meat in the freezer. Or I really dislike this proposal because it does X, Y, and Z. So you can present to the board of game in person, or you can submit a written comments to the board of game. And this does have quite a bit of weight in the board of game if you live in the region and you use the resource. So I highly recommend, if you're at all interested, to go check out how this works. The other way to get involved is through your advisory committee. So these meetings are held quite often, and this is a meeting where you can understand some of the current concerns in your region, and there's usually some opportunities to be involved that way. And all these meetings are listed on the ADF&G website. You just Google ADF&G Board a Game, and you'll have a list of all the meetings and all the AC meetings. And you could likely just swing into your local fish and game office, and they'll let you know. So, what has this done in regards to Alaska hares? So, before any of this work started, we knew nothing about them. So, you can't really have much of a management impact if you don't know anything about the species. So, there was no closed season, no bag limit. Now, in the Nome area, Nome and Kotzebue and Bethel area, there's a season and a bag limit. Last year at the Board of Game decided to have a no open season on Alaska hares in units 9 and 17, which is down by Dillingham and down on the peninsula, due to a conservation concern. And our hope is that within 3 to 6 years, we'll be able to do more surveys down there and then reopen that season. That's always the goal. So the last thing that's really dry that I wanted to talk about before everyone falls asleep, and then I'll go back to the fun stuff, is funding. And this has nothing to do with regulatory, but I think it's an important part as well. So I get asked a lot is how do you pay for this research? And is my tax dollars going to this? Well, one of the interesting things is back in 1937, wildlife populations weren't doing so well. So the Pittman and Robertson got together and made the Pittman-Robertson Act, which is referred to as PR funds. And so those are a tax on firearms and ammo and scopes at the manufacturer level. So if you go into your local store and you buy a box of ammo, you don't see that tax. It was already done on the manufacturer at the plant, at the manufacturer level. That tax is collected throughout the entire country. So someone in Florida might be buying ammo, and that's actually how I funded some of this work. So that money is then brought together and it's divided between all the states. And it's divided up by a formula that incorporates the number of people and, lucky for us, the size of your state. So we get the max amount, which is great. So we get a pot of money that came from buying ammo and firearms, essentially. Now, we don't get to use that money at the state unless we match it with some state funds. We don't match it like 1 to 1. We use a little bit of state and a lot of these PR funds. And where do we get the state funds? Well, we get them from every time you buy a hunting license or you apply for a drawing permit, things like that. So, like, for example, if you applied for a hunting drawing permit for 20 bucks, I can take that $20 and turn it into $100 of research. And it can only be used on wildlife projects. And the fish folks have a similar thing called the Dingle Johnson funds, and that's a tax on rod and reels and lures, and it's only on fish projects. And the only reason I like to mention this, because it's one of the few user pay government services. If you like to hunt and fish, your money is from hunting and fishing, is what pays this research. It didn't come from paying your federal taxes in most cases. This is where the vast majority of our funds come from. Okay, I'm done with that. I want to go back to fun stuff. So thanks for bearing that with me, and hopefully you're back to the fun things. So moving on, where do they go? So we need to figure out like how much land they use, home range sizes, and more importantly, one other thing is I wanted to understand why do they go where they go? But to do any of that, you got to catch one. And as you know, my background is with birds, and I thought foolishly, well, birds can just fly away. They're really hard to catch. A giant bunny can't fly away. It's got to be a lot easier to catch, and I've got tons of snowshoes over the years. It can't be that hard. Set a box trap down and catch a giant bunny. Well, it's going to be easy peasy. I'll be out of here. And so my first stab at this, you set the box up, and then you just get snowshoes constantly. I was like, huh, well, this isn't going to work. So move the box somewhere else where there's not as many snowshoes. Well, that ended up resulting in a lot of problems with like wind drifting, and turns out giant bunnies just don't like going in giant traps. It's very hard to get one to go into one of these box traps. Everything from wiring the doors opened for months to, I mean, you name it, hiding it in bushes, all kinds of different stuff. It just didn't work. I just want to point out that that box in the orange circle is a trap transmitter. So we hook these on the traps, and then we can remotely tell when the doors are down. So we don't have to leave the animal out there for extended periods of time. As soon as the trap door goes down, my phone buzzes and I can go out and deal with it. But that doesn't happen very often on this trap. So after the first season, we didn't catch a single thing. There were zero jackrabbits caught, and there was some serious doubt how many, if we could even catch these things. So I went back to the drawing board. I thought I've caught a ton of birds. And the way I catch a lot of birds is with a bow net, which is a hoop on the ground with springs on it. And it's one of those traps you wish you had as a kid. It's so simple. Hoop on the ground, held back by a clip, you pull a string and it closes. It's like very little things did not work in the winter. So I worked with Travis Booms, one of my good friends and coworkers, to figure out how to set this up in the winter. And this is what we came up with. Here you can see a picture of a bait pile and a bow net on the right hand side. And the hinges are in the circles of orange, and the bait's in the middle, and you tie a string to it. And when you pull the string, the top comes over, and animal's caught. And then the left side picture in the red circle is a blind. So you just sit in the blind, relax, read a book. A bunny shows up, you pull the string, wham, bam, you got a bunny. Can't be that hard, right? Turns out, I should have known this, but Alaska hares are mostly nocturnal. I thought, not a big deal. I worked on a bat project in Southeast, and we had night vision goggles. These ones right here. So I've used these in Southeast, and I've hauled these all over Western Alaska. You just kind of look through them, and every now and then look out, and if there's a big giant white bunny on your set, pull the string, and you got a bunny. Run out there, get a collar on it, and not that bad. Easy peasy. Well, that didn't work so well for certain reasons. But I will point out it did work. You could get it to work, and we ended up catching three hares doing this, and one actually during the day because I just kind of lived in a blind for a couple weeks. So it actually did work. The big drawback was it's really cold. And every time you breathe, if you happen to breathe when you're lifting your night vision goggles up, like you fog them instantly. So that's a problem. The other problem is you're really close. You got to be super quiet. You can't be shuffling around in your seat, making any noise. You can't have a heater going because it's too loud because they're walking right around you. And then you've got a little bit of your blind open that you're looking through with night vision goggles, and it's very, very cold. And so it did work, but you just knew there had to be a better way because more or less you're just slowly freezing to death all night long. So we went back to the drawing boards. I worked with a friend and a collaborator, Paul Malone, who's a resident in E-Cook in the winter, and he knows a lot about Alaska hares. So he had this idea of making a pen trap. So I worked with Travis Booms on the left here, and we spent a ridiculous amount of time coming up with an idea for a pen trap. And in the end, we ended up calling it our modified pen trap, but it's just some chicken wire and PVC. So what does this thing look like? So this modified pen trap is a roll of chicken wire that's about 8 to 12 feet rectangle out there. And this trap has two main doors on the end. And you can see the white PVC doors in this photo. There's two 3 foot by 3 foot doors on each end. Those doors are tied. Sorry, I'll try and go slow, but this is like one of those crazy setups that I don't even know how we figured it out, but it actually works. But it's very weird and one of those things you'd think of as a kid, but you don't think would actually work, but it definitely worked. So in the picture on the left, you can see the white trap door to the big pen. It's tied from a string to the top of a nail, and so is the other door. That nail is held up in just a coiled wire up high to hold those doors open. If you follow the string down that's tied to the nail in the second picture, that string's tied to the top of a rat trap. And then the rat trap trigger is tied to a piece of monofilament fishing line. The monofilament fishing line then goes across this bait pile and is tied from the rat trap right there to the other side. And the theory is the Alaska hare goes in, hits the monofilament by the bait pile, The rat trap goes, the doors come down, and now you've got an Alaska hare stuck in the pen. Now, how do you catch it? Well, we also put in a small box trap. And if you look through this picture, you can see the back of the box trap looks open, but it's actually not. That's a clear piece of PVC wired to the back. So if you're an animal in here and you look out that door, it looks like you can just walk right through it. So the theory is they're in the pen, they see this opening and they go through it, and bam, the trap goes down and the trap transmitter goes off. And that's your modified pen trap. So that's kind of how that system worked, and it worked pretty well. It was shocking. But in the end, we only caught 12 total Alaska hares through this work, and it was an immense amount of work to catch 12 of them. So in the Selk Hills, we only detected six, and we caught two of them. In Nome, we ended up catching seven total individuals, and in Ekook, there wasn't a ton of hares either, and we ended up catching three out of like six that year. So it did work pretty well, and a lot of times it would catch the same individual over and over and over again, just in different pen traps. So we rarely caught them in the same pen trap twice, but would catch them in a pen trap 3 miles away. So one individual, I think we caught him 6 times throughout the winter. So he was very trap happy. Now to the big question. After we got these collars on them, oh, here's an example of a collar. I wish I was there in person. After we get the collars on them, where do they go? Well, it turns out they can easily move 3 to 4 miles in just a matter of hours. They can just skedaddle back and forth. And a recent study in Arctic hares in Canada did a similar thing, and they're about the same size as an Alaska hares. And they described their hair movements of up to 240 miles. So there is a chance that these big hares can really migrate quite a bit. But none of ours have. They've all stayed within 10 to 15 miles of where we caught them, just going back and forth through that whole territory. And in this figure here, you can see the movements of an Alaska hare over a year, roughly, in the upper green portion. And there's some make some huge movements of 7 or 8 kilometers in an evening or throughout the day. And they kind of go back and forth through their preferred areas of their home range. And in the lower right-hand corner, you can see some movements of a snowshoe hare over the same time. You can see this hare basically just stood or hung out in a small little group of willow alder, made one big movement, and then hung out in that other area to forage. So you get kind of an idea about some of the differences in movements between these species. Excuse me. So to get a better understanding of this, you want to look at some of the home range sizes. So we use this data to construct what they call a kernel density estimate, which is a fancy way of saying how much land do they usually use and where in that land do they hang out the most. And in this example here, if you were to look at all the color on the right-hand side of the last hair, if you were to look at the green, the blue, and the pink, and you added up that area, that's where that Alaska hare was 95% of the time. If you went out into the woods and this hare was online, if you went to those green, blue, and pink spots, 95 out of 100 times you'd find that hare. And if we want to see what habitat they're really using, you want to look more at the 50% ISO plus, which is the pink ones in this figure. So if you went to those pink spots 100 times, 50 times out of 100, you're going to find the hare using that spot. So here it really shows the difference between the Alaska hare and a snowshoe hare. The Alaska hares have multiple areas that they use quite a bit. Snowshoe hares kind of hunker down in their core little area and then don't venture far from that. Not to get in too many numbers here, but you can expand these to how much area is that green, blue, and pink. Well, in the Nome area, if you're to look at that 95%, that equates to on average 5,000 acres. So one hare is using around 5,000 acres. And if we collared snowshoes as well, some of the snowshoes they're using 35 acres. So the Alaska hare is using 5,000 acres, the snowshoe hare is using 35. If we neck that down to like their core home range that they're using, Alaska hare on average is 650 acres, which is still pretty big. A snowshoe hare is 6 acres. So that's just a little bit of scale of how much different land requirements these animals need. We break it down to just Nome and we look at males and females. We see that males use, on average for their home range size is 7,000 acres. Females, on the other hand, use 3,000 acres, so they use less than half, and that trend kind of continues all the way through their home ranges. And that's not very shocking that males go further areas and use more land. That's pretty typical in other species as well that have large territories compared to females in the same area. So one interesting thing about movement ecology that really that I like to think about a lot is trying to understand, why did that animal go where it went? What was driving its movement from this location to that location? Did it go there just to avoid some predators or roads or people? Did it go there because it was hungry, because it wanted some more food from willows? And so this is one thing that movement ecologists like to tackle with what I like to call fancy math. I've said it a couple times, and they call it an integrated step selection function, which is just a fancy way of saying, if we take all these movements, what factors in the environment, whether it be elevation or the type of woods you're in or the type of tundra, what are all these different factors that you see out your window that are help predict why an animal went from A to B? Why did it go that way and not that way? So that's just what it really means. So how do you do this? You take all these movements from the collars, and you take all these different characteristics from habitat and the landscape, and you stick them in your computer, and you do a bunch of fancy math that I can't really do, but my computer sometimes does most of the time. Every now and then your computer burns up. It's just too much, and it takes weeks to run some of this stuff. But at the end of it, you get some information on which covariates or which elements of the environment are important. And you get a coefficient value. And I know that's a lot, but like the coefficient value kind of tells you whether something goes towards it, whether it's positive, or something avoids it. It's a negative number. And one last mathy thing I wanted to say is that this works by knowing where the animal is, where the animal went, and what those characteristics are around there, and then picking random places that it could feasibly go to in that distance around where it is, and trying to limit or trying to figure out what of these factors are really driving to that point. What's unique about this point and not this point? Why does it hang out here? So after you run all this stuff, you kind of get some things that you usually already know if you spend a lot of time in the woods. And that's one thing that kind of drives me a little nuts is you'll spend an enormous amount of time doing these exercises. And I could have kind of told you that they like high elevations, they like open tundra and tussocks, and they move long distances. But this kind of proves your ideas of what you think you're seeing out in the woods. So that's what we found. That's what they favored. And one of the things that did kind of surprise me is through all this, they tended to avoid rivers and streams. And that got me thinking that that's probably an artifact of that around the rivers and streams, as everyone on the call knows, in Nome, there's a really dense thickets of willow and alder, and they don't spend a lot of time in that. They'll spend some time, but not the majority of their time. And the other thing that they tended to avoid was roads and trails, which I thought was kind of interesting as well. So on to the last question of this for tonight is, what is their winter diet? Like, what do they eat in the winter? So I was really curious if they eat the same thing between the years, if they eat different things, if they're eating the same kind of plants in Nome as, say, Sellowick Hills, or even down south by like Ecook, and really wanted to dig into that. And in this picture here, you can see an Alaska hare pellet in the middle next to some snowshoe hare pellets, and you can really quickly tell how much bigger it is. But while I was out in the woods doing this at the beginning, I noticed that something that you notice too is a lot of times the Alaska hare pellet looks different than the snowshoe hare pellets. They just look different. Even though they're bigger, they just look different. So that made me wonder, are they really eating different things or not? And I kind of think they would be. And the other thing that I think is kind of interesting about these hares is most of us, or a lot of us, have seen snowshoe hare browse, how they girdle or eat the bark around a tree. And they'll do it wherever the snow's at. If the snow's this deep, they'll eat the bark as far as they can reach all the way around the willow bush. And they do that all over their range. That's one of the ways that snowshoes forage in the winter. Well, Alaska hares, they don't do that as often. They'll end up eating the tip of the willow down like a moose. And in this picture, that's my thumb. You can see they can browse that willow down to like the size of my pinky. I mean, they can really chomp their way down it. And that's something I don't see snowshoes do at all, really. Maybe they'll eat the buds off the tip, but they definitely browse differently as well. And on that same lines, this is a picture of all Alaska hare tracks, big bunny tracks, and they will go out in the open on these south-facing hills, and they will spend a lot of time digging up and uncovering the tundra underneath. And so that made me really think that they're definitely accessing a different food source from snowshoe hares, in which case that'd probably reduce their competition with snowshoes. So how do we figure out what they're eating? Well, lucky for us, we saved all those pellets from those transects over the years in the freezer here in Fish and Game. So I got a good use for them, and you can take that pellet and you can send it off to do what they call next generation sequencing. Basically, some genetics where you take that pellet and they analyze it for all the different plant genotypes in there. And then they amplify it, they make more of it, and then from that output, you can tell how much more it made. So it gives you not only what different plants are in the diet, but it gives you the relative abundance, how common that plant is in that sample you sent them. And at the end, you get a really nasty Excel sheet with a gazillions of stuff that is very hard to disentangle, but you can get through it if you have enough patience. But that's how we find out what plants are in their diet and how many of that type of plant is in their diet. So here's some more figures, and I'll go through them kind of quickly. Here we have Alaska hares in red and snowshoe hares in some funky light blue color that I made up. Um, and what this is showing, this is combining all the locations of all the Alaska hares and snowshoe hares that we have. What this shows us is that their diet in the winter is very different. Is different. Alaska or snowshoe hares kind of stick to the right side of this in a tighter group. Alaska hares kind of encompass all of it. So they do share a little bit, but they're very different diet overall. So Alaska hares definitely have a different diet and they have a more varied diet in the winter compared to a snowshoe hare. And that kind of makes sense when you think about the biology. The Alaska hares are out and about everywhere. They have no fear. They're out in the tundra. They're out in blizzards. Snowshoe hares, they're kind of refined to these willow thickets, these alder thickets. As soon as they kind of step out, there's just a big grease spot out in the tundra. I've seen it many times out there. So the snowshoe hares are kind of confined in the habitats they can live in. So then we know their diets are different. So I wanted to know, are the diets different between males and females? I doubted it, but I was just kind of curious. And so you can go through the analysis and nope, their diets are the same. Males and females eat the same thing. Here's another one that's a little complicated, but it's simply looking at Alaska hares only at the different areas that we had samples from. And it's just we're looking to see if there's any differences between the different regions. And we can see Nome and Ecook are almost the same. So we have Nome down by Dillingham as Ecook. They're kind of the same. And Selkirk and Platinum are off a little bit. The only one that's statistically different is Nome and Platinum. But honestly, I think a lot of this has to do with the small sample sizes. So Nome, we had 150 different individuals. Sellow Hills, we only had 7. So you're not limited by the number of pellets you picked up. You're kind of limited by the number of different individuals that you can run for these. So this one I'd hold a little bit with a grain of salt. To me, it kind of shows that they're eating the same diet everywhere, a relatively similar diet throughout the range. Now we get into some more of the interesting questions to me is how are the diets different between snowshoes and Alaska hares? Here we have a graph, and if you were to more on the right side of this graph, it's more unique. It means it's only found in that species compared to the other species. If you're more to the left, it's more common between the two species, the Alaska hares, the big ones, and the little ones, the snowshoes. And the size of that bubble, whether it be a small bubble or a big bubble, is how dominant that is in the sample. If it's a bigger bubble, they eat a lot of it. If it's a tiny little bubble, it might be unique to a species, but there's not a ton in the samples. So this is kind of interesting to me is that one of the things that's really different between Alaska hares and snowshoes are some of these rose species and bog rosemary. They're found almost exclusively only in Alaska hare diets and in relatively high proportions of their diet. This makes a little bit of sense because they go out in that tundra and forage. So this is kind of driving that or reinforcing that different foraging behavior that we're seeing between the two species. Now, on the flip side, how are their diets the same? I know they both eat willow. I knew that going into this, so I was kind of a little nervous how this would shake out. But here we have Alaska hares in orange and snowshoes in a darker blue, and the most dominant plant species in the diet was willow, and it was a dominant for both of them, which is a good thing. They both eat a lot of willows. They do. They eat them different that I know from observations, but they eat a lot. The next one, I was a little surprised, is dwarf birch. I know from some limited literature on Alaska hares and observations, they eat dwarf birch, but they don't eat a ton of it. Nothing compared to snowshoes. Snowshoes eat almost as much dwarf birch as they do willows. That one kind of surprised me too. And that can also be an indicator of nutritional stress or the fact they don't have enough food. So maybe these snowshoes are on the downhill slide and they're cycling and they're running out of food. They're maybe relying more on dwarf birch. And this is kind of when some of the sampling was taking place. We go down a little bit further. The snowshoes are definitely eating a lot of alder, and Alaska hares don't even touch it. They have plenty of options. They don't really want to eat alder, and honestly, not many things do. It's got a lot of toxins that can build up in it. So that doesn't really shock me, which is good. I was a little worried that all this was hocus pocus and not going to work. So, overall, throughout this study, what did we learn? And this is kind of the big picture that I like to think about, is that we learned that transect surveys to pick up pellets is probably the best way to count them. We tried a bunch of different ways that other people count hares in their different regions and countries. And for us in Western Alaska, getting on a snow machine, repeating a transect, going up and down, tracking, picking up pellets, even though it's time consuming, it takes a lot of time. It's also really a lot of fun, but don't tell my boss that. I really enjoy it, but this is probably the best way to do it. I can't really think of too many other ways that would do a decent job and still provide the information we need. Um, what else did we learn? We learned that they're in really low densities throughout the range. And in my experience going throughout a lot of their different habitat, there are Alaska hares throughout their range in Western Alaska. It's not like they're wiped out of everywhere except for a few pockets. There's Alaska hare sign on random mountains all through Western Alaska. They're just in really low densities. There's not many of them per area, at least not compared to some of the folks I talked to that worked there in the 60s. And some of these reports of seeing hundreds of them together. That just doesn't really happen anymore. And I'm always like kind of curious what that does to the social factor of these animals. Like they used to hang out in big groups and now they don't. But going on to some of the movement stuff, we learned they have huge home ranges compared to snowshoes. They can move incredible distances even within a few hours. And interestingly, they avoid rivers and streams and roads, and they like the high elevations and tundra. They have different diets than snowshoes, and we know what kind of plants that are different between them and what are the plants that are the same between them. And all these different components of this project really help inform management and some conservation actions for the species. So quickly for the future, I want to repeat these surveys. We tried last year, and as you folks in Nome know, in Western Alaska, the weather was not great for snow, and you really need to have snow to do these transects. And the DNA from the hair is on the outside of the pellet. So if it rains on the pellet, it washes all the DNA off. So it's useless for that. So it's kind of a hard thing if you don't live in Western Alaska. You guys didn't have snow until the end of the spring, and I was busy with other work and I couldn't make it out there. So I wasn't able to go out to Nome last year, but we're trying this year, and hopefully I'll be out in Nome the last 2 weeks of February. And it might get bumped unless you get some more snow soon. But if you see me on the street, say hi. You see me getting gas at the AC, say hi. I always like talking to folks about bunnies. The other thing that I just briefly mentioned is that I'm always curious about predators. I get asked a lot about what's eating them. Well, it's going to be hard to impossible to do a mortality study on these things. I've thought for years about how to do this. I can't come up with a good way because I can't catch enough of them. And traditionally, like for a moose mortality, we would collar a bunch of moose calves and we'd follow them until they either lived or they died. And then if they die, we go see what ate them and what's getting them, right? So I don't know if I could get enough baby bunnies on the air, and I don't think I could spend enough time in a Western Alaska. I don't think my wife would like it if I spent the entire summer in Nome tracking baby bunnies. But it is an option, and it's something I toy with in my head all the time. One thing I do know is that the recruitment, which is the number of like offspring born in a year that make it to the next year to reproduce, is quite low in Alaska hares. Um, that doesn't surprise me at all. They're most vulnerable when they're little, and the vast majority of wild populations, the highest mortality is that first year of life when they don't really know what's going on, and a lot of things can eat them. So once an Alaska hare gets to be adult size within by October, it's born in June. By October, it's adult size. Not many things like a fox can eat one. I've watched foxes and Alaska hares go around each other. However, the baby bunnies, the leverets, I'm sure foxes would love to snatch those up. So I think there's quite a bit of predator effect on the offspring. As far as adults go, I've worked with golden eagles a lot, and I know they do take they take some adults. We've done some studies out in Seward Peninsula, and we don't find a ton of Alaska hare remains. We do find a few. So, lastly, I'd like to point out this field work took a toll on all of us. I really want to thank my friend Travis Booms for all his help he did throughout this project. And I think these pictures, I like these pictures. It kind of reminds me of like, oh yeah, that it seems fun in hindsight, but at the time you're exhausted. So you start these things, you're happy and smiling. By the end, you can barely keep your eyes open because you're doing transects during the day and you're dealing with bunnies all night long and trap transmitters going off. So you really don't sleep for a couple months and you're away from home. Yes, it is a very fun but hard work. I'd also like to thank my family in the upper left here. They let me go on these wild hair adventures and they hold down the fort when I'm gone. And I know it puts a lot of strain on everybody, but I absolutely love the work I do. And it's a ton of fun out there and it's a ton of important work that needs to be done. And I don't have enough time to thank everyone that helped me out. I mean, this is a few folks that helped me out, and it's been one of my favorite things about this project is taking people to Western Alaska from Fairbanks that have never gotten to see it. It's an amazing place. I love it out there. Anywhere in Western Alaska, I have a ton of fun. It's a beautiful place you guys have, and I wish I could be out there all the time, especially even in the winter. I'm one of the crazy ones. I've worked out there in the summer on raptors and bunnies in the winter, and I love the winter out there. So much fun. And with that, thank you for listening. Hope I didn't put you to sleep, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
All right. Well, first off, Chris, I think this is it's a no-brainer to say that was awesome. And this
Oh,
is the time while people are thinking of their questions, we say it's never easy being a speaker, and we ask the audience to put some love in the chat box for the speaker because that was great. That was really great. And um
thank you.
we'll get to questions and comments. I've got something at the end, and you'll probably
Okay.
kill, you'll probably kill me, but we'll let others go first. And yeah, thank you, Straight Science audience. Those are some nice comments you're giving Chris. That was an awesome job. We could tell you really love the country. And I just kept thinking of that game Mousetrap when you were talking about your rat with trap with the spring and the chicken wire and the I don't know, there's like a stick and then the net. I mean, whatever. That's how it works. That's kind of how it rolls, isn't it, out here? I mean,
Yeah.
you
It's
figure
just
it
like,
out. You got to
okay.
figure it out.
Yep. It didn't work. And then you do it again. And you're like, oh, we forgot to do this. Oh, that didn't work. We forgot to do this now. It's just like, yeah, it took a long time to come up with that.
Yeah, but you never gave up and you had success. So that's the thing. It
Yep.
worked. It worked. Yeah, don't
Yep.
give up.
Nope. I do love it out there. It is an amazing place. I do like Western Alaska a lot.
All right. Any questions or comments for Chris? Ooh, there's one, Sarah. Thank you, Chris. Excellent presentation. Why do you think the Alaska hares in Nome had such larger home ranges compared to Ekuk? Was it just because there were more males? I know sample sizes are low. Just wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
Great question. I didn't talk about ecook because I was worried about time and I knew I put too much in there. But one of the big differences between Nome and ecook is just the habitat they have access to. If you know Nome, if you look out the window, you got mountains and you've got coastal lands and you can go inland and they can go a lot of different ways, right? If you go to ecook, it's down by Clark's Point, across from Dillingham. It's on this little tiny peninsula, and ecook's on the side there. And so they're kind of limited in this unless they go all the way up and around and cross the river to get on the Dillingham side. And that river doesn't freeze a lot of times, or doesn't freeze well for quite a while. So they're kind of stuck in this flat lower land. And so if you were to do some of that stuff on elevation change, for example, it would come out to be not important because they don't have access to higher mountains there. They're kind of stuck in these like lower lands. They have some elevational change and they hang out on the hills there, but nothing like Nome. So I think I'm not certain, but we had two males and one female in Ecook. It's due to where they're at in Ecook, their surroundings. They just can't really spread out there too far. But that's a hunch.
All right. Did that get it, Sarah? You good? I think she is. Yep. Yep.
Cool.
Thank you. All right. Any other thoughts and questions? You like tackled Western Alaska. That was so great. And you didn't give up and you got it. You got it. It doesn't sound like, and I can see why now, why all your predecessors didn't do Alaska, Alaska hares. I don't know.
That's a
That was interesting. 800 here and 800 there.
that's a good point. I mean, there's a reason that some of these species don't get studied a lot because it's very challenging to work on some of these ones out there.
Yeah. And
Some of these really,
Frank
sorry, go
Myomick in St. Michael says giant rabbits at where?
ahead. They are scattered throughout their distribution, all through that Western Alaska. Like if you were to fly out in the hills out of Dillingham, I'm sure we could find an Alaska hare out there, but just not many of them. Like they're like one of the few places I've been that I know they used to be was the Baldwin Peninsula. And that's 80 miles long of surveys, and I couldn't find any sign of one there. But that's the only place where I know they used to be, but I can't find them. Everywhere else I know they used to be, I can usually find some out in there. But man, it is hard. I know a lot of people just want to see one that I work with. That like a lot of those volunteers never got to see one, which is still pretty wild to me. I mean, it's
Yeah.
hard to find one when you know where they're at.
All right. Well, while people are thinking of their thoughts, I've got one for you. I actually got a message this morning. Now I'm in meetings all day, but I today, and I got a message from Native Village of Diomede,
Hmm.
and they were reminding me, and I thought, oh man, I don't know if I ever told you this, Chris, but they reminded me in 2014 about the Alaska Hare event they had on the island. Now, Diomede, if everybody I think knows where Diomede is, but it's right in the Strait. It's 21, 22 miles offshore and right next to Big Diomede. And in 2014, and I've got some pictures that people sent. So I don't know if you stop sharing, if it's okay to show you
Yeah,
these
yeah, of
pictures if you
course.
want. So there were so if you, let's see, I'm gonna stop share. So you hit that green box on the toolbar.
Okay. And where's stop at?
Okay. Or I'll do it.
Maybe you could do it. Yeah, I don't have a.
Okay.
I have share, and that's the only option they give me. Maybe pause.
Okay.
Oh, that work?
Yep, that works. Okay.
Sorry
And
about that.
then no, it's all good. And I'm kind of, but it's getting in. But they wanted to know um what was the outcome. And I need to fill you in on this. But so if I go like this, right? And I go like that. So this was in 2014, and there are stories in the past of rabbits or Alaska hares or
Hmm.
on, and I hope that is one. For my understanding, I'm not a big Alaska hare person, but on Diomede in 2014, there was a summer fall season where they were. And I've heard about one also in the like late 70s, sort of a 20-year thing. And
Yeah.
these rabbits, this one here, there were three total that were harvested, and
How
one
many?
was in June, and two were harvested in September. And the June one was pregnant. So this is one of the September ones, and you can see the fella's feet there for size. And interestingly, these two males I know were harvested on the very top of diamate. Okay, so that's one. There's
Yep.
there's the other. There's another. This must have been one of the early on ones, I would imagine, or maybe in the when did they change their color?
Oh, there we go. Sorry, I couldn't see the pictures. Now I can.
Oh, let me start. Okay, there's the one.
Yep. That one. Yep.
Maybe you can tell us can you tell us anything about these
Well,
animals?
yeah, no, yeah, they'll keep their white on them until like July. Um,
Okay.
Typically, like they'll hang out in those big icy snow patches at the top of the hill, top of the mountains. That's where they're hanging out and hiding. They'll dig
Yeah.
burrows in those occasionally, and that's an interesting thing is they're the only hare species that I can find that'll dig a hole. Like snowshoes and even these guys, when they have leverets babies, they just dig a little nest spot in the ground. But yeah, that's.
And there's plenty of foxes on uh
Mhm.
Arctic fox. And then this
Yep.
is one of the one that was harvested in June was pregnant with seven.
Yep.
And this is the size of it in one of them in when it was harvested. They were pulling you know,
Yep.
everybody was so interested in these animals. They were consumed. I don't know about the fetus, maybe so. I don't know. I doubt it, but I don't know.
Yep.
But
That completely tracks. They should start breeding in the end of April-ish, mid-April. That's when we'd see those big congregations of them years ago, and then they kind of disperse outside those time windows. And then yeah, so they get breed then, and then usually like middle, early, late June is when we think they give birth. Yeah, and they
so
have
the
six to
question,
eight leverets, 6 to 8 babies,
okay,
so that all
perfect.
tracks.
Yeah. So the question was, so these tissues, some of those, the reason there's a glove in there is some of these the fetuses were sent in for the
Hmm.
museum
Hmm.
when they found out there were Arctic, last, whatever you call them, tundra hares
Yeah.
on Diomede. They were really wanting genetic material to find out, are these
Hmm.
Russian hares
Yep.
or are these Alaska? I mean, I don't know how that works. And tissues were sent in, and we never, at least if I remember right, that's why Diomede saw the poster for your talk and we're like, what were the results? And so the
Okay.
UAF Museum of the North has the materials, I think. I don't know if there was um
Yeah.
any other follow-up on that
Well, that's a
or
bummer nobody
report.
followed up. That's not me, but I did use a lot of those tissues to design the genetic project of this. So the
There
tissues
you
they sent
go.
in, I used those. I got a little piece of it, and I sent it to another lab to make the genetic markers for this project. So I used a lot of the museum samples for that. Um,
Awesome.
I know
So
the
they did get
curator at the
used.
museum, so I can ask him where
Link
that ended
also.
up at. Yep.
Yeah. And what the results were they Alaskan rabbits or hares or were they Chukotkin? I don't know if there's a difference
Yeah.
because of the water.
Yep.
And then
So
the other thing I was, well, go ahead. Go ahead.
on that side is tundra hares, and on our side is Alaska hares, and it's kind of a debate if they're different. They're very similar species, right?
Okay.
And I'm sure some go back and forth occasionally when the winter's good, get a good nice
Yeah.
ice.
Yeah.
But yeah, it can be kind of hard to genetically tell them apart.
Okay.
So there's a good chance that if I had to guess out of that, they just couldn't tell what was what. But that's my hunch. I'll check with them and see.
Yeah, we'd love a little report. So to report out back to
Yeah,
Diomede or even a
yeah,
little
of
something
course.
in the paper. I don't know if I think if I remember right, I think they got some coverage. And I'm so sorry I forgot about it. But Diomede saw your poster, emailed me today and said, whatever happened or what are the results or were those what was it? So thank shout out to Native Village of Diomede and everyone on there. And yeah, hopefully we can get the rest of the story to them. And I thought you might be interested because that kind of kills your density.
Hmm.
Uh, and then also on St. Lawrence Island, and I've been desperately looking to try to find the year, but I think it's around. the same time, 2012, 2000, I think the ice was pretty extensive in 2012, 13 in
Hmm.
there. And the St. Lawrence Islands has had a reintroduction of Alaska hares as well. And I don't know the status recently of whether
Okay.
people are seeing them, but we were getting, they'd be down actually on the sea ice when you're butchering a whale. That's when
Awesome.
they were first seen. And people
Yeah,
were
one
like,
of the
man, those things
things
can fly.
when I was asking different communities and different folks is they'd see them out on the sea ice or near the sea ice, and they thought they were eating salt out there too. So there's quite a few reports of them being done by the sea ice. I tried
All
salt
right. Well,
for bait, that didn't
thank you
work,
for
but
giving me 5 minutes on that. I appreciate it. Don't mean to
yeah,
take
of
away from your
course.
sleep, but it's a mystery and something that Diomede thought of when they saw your talk was coming and wanted to know more about it.
Oh, shoot, I should have reached out earlier. I didn't know. But
That's all right. You're
no,
coming to town. Come by. We can set up a call or Zoom or
yeah,
something.
no,
Yeah.
sounds good.
Okay. Sounds good. All right. And then Hannah A says, when I was still in my hunting mode, I used to get them in the Topcock Hills. You
Yep.
see them there?
I've been through there, and I don't know how you'd survey that country. Holy cow, can it blow there? I went through there one time, and it was like you couldn't see the skis on the snow machine coming from White Mountain. It was like, oh man, that's some rough country. But I do know there's Alaska hares like on the road going to Council up in the mountains there. There's Alaska hares through a lot of that, and I just had a harder time surveying that far out. Just run out of time. There's so many places to go and so little time, you know. I did what I could do, but I know that there are some out there. Yep.
All
That is
right.
some windy country.
And I guess I would ask, what's the most unexpected thing for all your efforts on these hairs? Are we, or what's the most unexpected portion of that?
My favorite thing, or the thing I
Either way.
didn't expect about myself doing, was so much of the board game stuff. Like that's why I put it in there because like I mean I'm a researcher so I try and hide from that word as far as possible. 'Cause it means wearing a suit and a tie and talking in front of like your boss and in front of the lawyer. It's that's a big deal. And so I try and hide from that like it's the plague. And getting to do that, I realized it's not. I wouldn't say I enjoy it. That's a bit of a stretch, but I see the importance in some of that stuff. Over the years, in the last 25 years I've been working on wildlife, 20 years, like it's one of the few things that like I think that there could be a conservation rebound from, something I feel really good about. So that's pretty been unexpected. I didn't think anything would actually change, you know, and things change. And getting to work with the different people out in the communities, just checking in with folks while you're out snow machining and someone runs up, what you doing? You talk about bunnies and I remember one encounter where I was talking with somebody and they're like, they're everywhere, you know. And I was like, well, that one track you see for 10 miles is the same bunny. He's just going back and forth. And like, I picked the pellets up and I'll let you know, but yeah, it's the same bunny, you know. And so, like, just getting to talk to folks out there. But I don't know what the biggest surprise is. Maybe like, I told somebody once that I only caught 12 and they went, wow, that's a lot. So that was a nice reward. Because you're like,
Yeah.
man, you know, you talk about moose or something, and it's like how many hundreds, and you talk about these things, and it is all you can do to catch 12. And I was told I wouldn't catch more than a couple if I was lucky. So
Yeah, but do moose do 40 miles an hour in deep snow?
I don't think so. That's a Bryn question.
Bryn?
Negative.
Okay. Yeah, so they might be small, but I think they might be a lot harder. Yeah, I mean, just people should think about that. That's good.
Yeah. Yeah, I did that. The most surprising thing is the first one I ever caught was in the Sellout Hills from a helicopter. And we were surveying for him, and he took off up the mountain. We were just trying to follow him, and he went up that mountain faster than we could go in an R44. He just like burned up that hill and jumped in a hole. And it was like that thing was up there before we could. I'm huge, that doesn't help, and full of fuel, but like still, that thing could just flat out fly. It's incredible how fast they can go.
Wow. All right. Well, uh, Frank Myomic, I don't know, I don't want to put you on the spot, so you don't have to answer, but do you see Alaska hares at St. Michael's?
Yeah.
Yeah, we see them once in a while. Kind of limited, but yeah. I also work with Jessica Garen with droning might be a way to do stuff, but I wouldn't know
Yeah.
with Mike DeLu and Alan.
Yeah, maybe a drone, huh? That might be
Yep,
the way. Yeah.
it might be the way. Yep. Yeah, the first last hare I ever saw was between south of St. Michael's in the mountains there. And then
Well done, St. Michael's.
saw it out of a helicopter doing a different project. I'm like, what is that thing? It's enormous. I was sitting on an ice patch in the summer. Yeah.
So, did you see any with your thermal binoculars?
Yeah, these night vision doodads. Yeah, no, we caught three doing it, but the problem is it's like you go like this and you look and then you go like this and you accidentally breathe on them, they'll fog up and you gotta be really quiet and you get really cold. So sitting in, not moving for like 16 hours for a week straight while freezing just got a little too old, but I miss it. Like it's my favorite way to catch them, honestly, because the adrenaline rush and like you're just kind of bored, and then all of a sudden there's a giant bunny in front of you, and you're very close to them. You're only 50 yards from them at most. So like yeah, you can hear them walking beside your blind, and you can hear them crunch, crunch, crunch. So it's probably my favorite way to catch them, but it's also the most painful. So
All right. Any other questions? Or we probably should let Chris, I remember you're doing this at the office and I feel for your family. They got to get you back. So we should probably uh let you go. Any other comments? But thank you so much. That was very interesting and enjoyable. And even the board of game stuff, I think, is very important for people to realize you can make a very big difference with your testimony. And
yep,
we're rolling here into the North Pacific Fisheries Management
yep,
Council meetings are coming up on Monday, and it's the same thing. You can make a
yep,
difference with the marine fisheries and things like
yep.
that, testifying and providing public input, things like that. So it's the same sort of deal. It's really important for people to do that. So, and you're
That
still getting
public.
kudos on the screen and in the chat box. So Chris, you nailed it. For everyone, next week, Straight Science will be on Thursday the 5th. We are going to go back to the ocean, and they have done tagging of the ice seals, so ribbon, bearded, spotted, and ringed seals. And what they're trying to do is to look at what is the springtime haul out behavior on the ice. Now they were looking at it to do when they're doing their counts, how many seals might be in the water. But I think people might be interested to know what environmental conditions affected those seals, uh, getting them up on top of the ice or not. So I thought that would be a good one for wintertime to ponder and maybe think about as we'll eventually roll into spring and spring hunt. So tune in next week for springtime ice haul out behavior for the ice seals. So different way to maybe think about that data. With that, Chris, thank you so much again. And I'm going to look forward to you. You got my cell phone number. Give a
Yep.
call when you get to know them, and we'll make sure we get an audience at Diomede, and you can provide maybe some answer to their. And I'm so sorry I forgot about that. And I'm so glad they reminded
Yeah, no, no, that sounds great.
today.
Hopefully
So
see
I'm
you in a
sorry
few
they
weeks.
didn't make it on.
Oh, no worries, but yeah, hopefully see you in a few weeks.
All right. With that, everyone, have a good night. Thanks so much for coming, and we'll see you next time. Good night,
Thank
everybody.
you.